The swift advance of terrorists in Iraq, not fighters or Sunni rebels or revolutionaries, as some media outlets have called them, led by the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant or the ISIL, has sparked international alarm. So much so that Baghdad has formally requested U.S.'s help. But is U.S. military engagement the right move? In this edition of the debate, we'll ask the real motives of the U.S. in Iraq, in which the U.S. President Barack Obama has said, in addition to this 275 military officers that it will send to protect the Green Zone, that it's going to send up to 300 military advisors. Isn't that the same as boots on the ground? Well, we're also going to ask Saudi Arabia's role in this matter, whether the U.S. is cooperating with them, and also discuss what Syria's UN representative has said, that this is a scheme by the West to safeguard Israel's interests through creating havoc in the Middle East, pitting Muslims against Muslims with the Western stated goal of regime change in Iran.
It seems the United States is preparing the ground to once again intervene militarily in Iraq, as the Arab country's armed forces are engaged in fierce fighting against Takfiri militants from the so-called Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, or the ISIL. This, as the Iraqi foreign minister has called on Washington to help Baghdad over the crisis.
Iraq has officially asked for the help of the United States, according to the Strategic Framework Agreement between Iraq and the US, to help in the air raids against the strategic targets for such groups.
The White House claims it's not willing to send U.S. military forces to Iraq, but insists on having the right to take whatever action necessary in dealing with the situation.
Again, the president has not ruled out anything except for sending U.S. combat troops into Iraq. And he has always maintained a position that the United States retains the right to act in defense of our national security interests when the commander-in-chief views that as necessary.
The U.S., which already has more than 6,000 security forces in the country, has announced plans to increase the number of its forces in Baghdad. It has also sent aircraft carrier USS George H.W. Bush to Persian Gulf from the North Arabian Sea. Many experts believe that these developments show the U.S. wants to send its military forces into Iraq to relaunch its military operations there, under the guise of fighting terrorism. This is while Iran has expressed its stiff opposition to such a scenario. The Iranian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Mazia Afkam earlier in the week said Baghdad enjoys the necessary military capabilities and the popular power to defeat terrorism and extremism. Iraq has been grappling with deadly violence by Al-Qaeda-linked ISIL militants for more than a week now. The ISIL, which does not enjoy popular support in the Iraqi society, is said to be backed by U.S. allies in the region, including Saudi Arabia, Qatar and Turkey. America's possible military intervention in Iraq comes as previous invasions of the country and also Afghanistan, which altogether claimed the lives of a large number of civilians, have effectively led to the upsurge of terrorism in both countries and beyond.
Well, let me introduce our guests for this edition of the debate. We have Dr. Webster Griffin Tarpley joining us. He's an author and historian. And also from London, we have Carol Gould. She's an author and political commentator who joins us. I'd like to welcome you both. Dr. Tarpley, let me start with you. What are we looking at here? I don't know if you heard the U.S. President Barack Obama, who just spoke at the White House. He said that he's going to be sending 300 additional military advisors to train the forces there. This is, of course, after announcing the 275 Marines who are going to protect the Baghdad embassy. Clarify for us the term advisors, because many are saying that's boots on the ground. It sounds awfully like what they said about Libya in terms of advisors, not to mention what they were going to leave in Iraq when they left, again using the term advisors.
I think Obama is extremely reluctant to become involved, and that what he's doing is the character of a concession to the raving warmongers from the Republican Party, who this morning were popping off in the Senate. That includes McCain, Lindsey Graham, Saxby Chambliss of Georgia, and a bunch of others who want large-scale bombing, and they want, in many cases, actual infantry brigades. But let's just step back. This ISIS, or ISIL, is a very artificial creation. According to all the intelligence we have, it is first of all financed and commanded by Prince Abdul Rahman Faisal of Saudi Arabia. He is the brother of Prince Saud al-Faisal, the foreign minister, and also of Prince Turki al-Faisal, who had been ambassador to London and to the United States here. So it's a Saudi operation, and it comes out of a training camp which the US, the British, and the French, in other words, NATO, had established in Jordan quite a few months ago to train guerrilla fighters, death squads, that would be used principally against Assad in Syria, but now they've been retasked. The leader of this ISIS is a fellow called Baghdadi. He has a 4-year diploma, a 4-year degree as an asset of the CIA, which he got by being in a prison camp and getting brainwashed and becoming a double agent as a condition for coming out. And the goal of this entire thing is multiple. It is to try to save the Syrian rebels from ultimate defeat, which is otherwise facing them, to overthrow the government of Maliki in Iraq with the excuse that it's too pro-Iranian, to try to bring in then Iyad Alawi, the classic US puppet inside Iraq. And perhaps if they can start bombing, when you listen to Senator McCain and Lindsey Graham, they say the bombing can begin in Iraq, but it should then extend into Syria, which is extremely dangerous. And then, of course, if you begin in Iraq, maybe you might venture into Iran, which is even more dangerous. So I would recommend, obviously, not doing any of that. The one interesting thing the US government could do would be to issue an ultimatum to Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, the Emirates, Oman, and the rest of those Gulf states to stop their financing and logistical support for this ISIS. The Turkish government is also very heavily involved, right? The ISIS operated out of a sanctuary in Turkey. Last summer, they made a big attack on Latakia in Syria, killed a lot of people. It's reported that those cadavers of children were used then in August of last year for the Ghouta so-called chemical weapons scare, which was, of course, orchestrated, but that some of the grisly human remains were actually brought in by ISIS. After that, ISIS was transferred across southern Turkey to Raqqa in Iraq, and now they've been retooled for the current mission. The other thing I have to say is that members of the Iraqi army, the officers, generals, were quite obviously bribed by the CIA, told that they should run away. Remember the Nazi blitzkrieg against France in 1940. Turns out a lot of those French generals were on the payroll of Hitler. And in this case, it looks to me like the Iraqi generals that ran away were on the payroll of the US, the CIA, and NATO. So we're being faced with a very artificial situation. But of course, this can lead to real tragedy on a tremendous level. I think the US government really ought to cooperate with Assad. If you want to stop ISIS, you should cooperate with Assad, because he can destroy the bases of ISIS.
Carol Gould, Dr. Tarpley talked and mentioned many fronts there. Your reaction?
Well, to a certain extent, I agree with some of the things that have been said, with some of his points. The facts that he presents, for the most part, are correct. But I could not see the United States now partnering with Assad. I just can't see it happening. The other thing is, it's very important that 74% of Americans polled this week in a national poll, in two national polls actually, one was 70%, the other 74%, most Americans are vehemently against any kind of engagement in either Syria or Iraq. Obama is up against that. The fact that the populace of the United States is against any military involvement. Obama has always been an anti-war president. He is not a war president. He has never wanted to engage militarily anywhere. Then when we talk about the allies, the quote allies of the United States, let's look at the United Kingdom. When Prime Minister Cameron wanted to intervene in Syria last year, Parliament voted against it, so his hands were tied. When Obama heard that, within a few hours, he decided to step back. So the people who are being put on the ground, your other guest suggested that this isn't as it seems. These are not military people. These are going to be security advisors. But I cannot see, no matter how much Lindsey Graham and Saxby Chambliss and the right and Fox News scream and shout, they are not going to be able to literally engage the United States in military operations. They are in a minority. They are in a very small minority. And Obama isn't just going to go in and bomb and do shock and awe the way Bush did without the support of the majority of Congress and the Senate, which he's not going to get that support. So I don't see this as developing into a huge war. It would be a terrible thing if it did. But both the United Kingdom and the United States have very fierce opposition in the populace and in their governing bodies, the Parliament and the Congress, to any military engagement in either country, in Syria or Iraq or both.
Well, Dr. Tarpley, you talk about the U.S. engagements in Iraq in terms of the multiple fronts, such as when you said that the U.S. is actually responsible for the way that the Iraqi army acted, pretty much fleeing the scene, that they were, well, in whatever shape or form influenced by the U.S., and that's in sharp contrast to what many have deducted to have been Saudi Arabia's role as playing a hand in that, along with the fact that obviously they have been the ones who are supporting the ISIL, even though Saudi Arabia is saying they're not. Prime Minister Nouay Maliki has come out, blamed them, and also we have heard other countries blaming Saudi Arabia for supporting this ISIL. Is the U.S. Playing a double face here? I mean, that's what it sounds like based on the assessments that you've made.
Well, what I'm trying to point out is this is an opportunity to educate the American people in the idea that Saudi Arabia is actually an enemy, that Saudi Arabia is responsible for these destabilizations and civil wars. And of course, I know that the U.S. foreign policy establishment does not want to do anything for Assad, but since they're telling us that ISIS is the end of the world, right, that it's literally the apocalypse personified with these supermen about to sweep down on Baghdad, well, in that case, Assad is certainly a lesser evil. The other question, though, the U.S. politics on this, the other coup, in addition to the anti-Maliki coup, that is the goal of this operation, is a cold coup around Obama. And McCain came out and said it last week. He demanded that Obama fire all of his own loyalists, and of course, these are, in my view, bad people, but still, those are Obama's people, and bring in General Petraeus, General David Petraeus of the Pentagon and the CIA and Wall Street. He now works for Kohlberg Kravis Roberts. He's got a financial angel with multi-billion-dollar deep pockets. And of course, Petraeus personifies the danger of Bonapartism here in the United States, of a kind of a dictatorial seizure of power. And we know that this clique is now super active. The neocons are mobilized as never before. And I'm talking about Kimberly Kagan at the Institute for the Study of War, Frederick Kagan at the American Enterprise Institute, Donald Kagan at the Brookings Institution, and his charming wife, Victoria Nuland, who has disgusted the world with her vulgarity. The goal of this is coming on the heels of Benghazi, which was an anti-Obama October surprise designed to bring in Romney and the neocons, but it failed. After this Bo Bergdahl hysteria, which we've had, this is now the third wave of a neocon counteroffensive designed to push out whoever Obama has that doesn't want to go along with it and put in neocons. And I would also add, Kerry of Skull and Bones, the Secretary of State, and Samantha Power, the humanitarian bomber who represents the U.S. at the United Nations. These are people who have been scheming to get a way to bomb Syria now for months, and it's been on the front page of the Washington Post, and they have actually brought in Petraeus and this General Keane, who is a friend of this entire group, to try to find ways to push Obama towards war with Syria.
Okay, I'd like to get your reaction, Carol Gould, to some of the things Dr. Tarpley talked about there, but we do have to give our guests the respect. We had so many, our Facebook viewers the respect since they posted so many comments about this topic tonight. Let's take a listen to some of them.
America is behind all wars in the Arab countries. I think the US will send aircraft carriers, submarines, destroyers, jets and bombers near Iran to show they are going to attack those terrorists, but they may invade Iran. An absolutely wrong decision made by Iraqi government. How long should the Iraqi government beg for their own security from other countries like the USA? If the Iraqi army makes sacrifices and defeats the terrorist group, they would become a hero among the Arab countries. Nobody can't stop these freedom fighters. The US is responsible for all the turmoil. They have founded the ISIL, so how can they help end this unrest? Keep the US out. Let them solve their own problems.
Some of the viewer comments there. Carol Gould, I was caught off guard before I came on for this program when I looked at the monitors we have inside the newsroom, and I happened to glance over at CNN, and their little CG, as it's called, in the bottom said, "Reshaping the Middle East." And this sounded so much like what the era of George Bush and Condoleezza Rice, of which they talked about redrawing the maps in the Middle East. And it appears that's what they're doing, except for the stumbling blocks that they've experienced. We could talk about, of course, the Arab Spring, where the revolutions were stopped on their tracks, mainly through Saudi Arabia, not only in the kingdom, but also in Bahrain and also in Yemen. And of course, most recently now, we see what defeats they have had in Syria. Is this part of that plan still, the U.S. and its regional allies, such as Saudi Arabia, pushing, redrawing and reshaping the Middle East with Iran on their mind?
Well, first of all, you're talking about a group of people who haven't been in power for many years. Condoleezza Rice, no matter how much Dick Cheney can shout, as he's been doing in the past few weeks, he doesn't have any authority. I think we're overblowing this whole situation. Let me go back to this issue of Cameron and Parliament. The two big allies who could reshape the Middle East, the United Kingdom and the United States, have terrible financial problems. I say this whenever I'm on these programs. You have to take into account that Obama and Cameron in the UK are dealing with their own country's huge financial problems. Technically, both countries are nearly bankrupt. They'd like to show that their economies are recovering, but there's been a terrible financial meltdown in both countries, and that is why the majority of people in both countries not want a military engagement. And you know, they are democracies. Obama isn't a dictator, neither is Cameron. They do listen to the people. And as much as the people who are getting a little bit over the top about this situation, that Saudi Arabia is guiding everything, that the neocons in America are taking over the situation. At the end of the day, both countries are democracies, and Obama cannot commit a huge military involvement, neither can Cameron. And at the ultimate stage of this crisis, which has, I believe, I agree with your guest, been terribly overblown into hysteria by the extreme right in America, diplomacy has to come in. There has to be some kind of a cooling down with not just the US and the UK, but the allies, NATO, and other countries. The Middle East has become, as we know, as you've mentioned, the Arab Spring has degenerated into chaos in several countries, and there is still a great deal of internecine strife. But I think what Obama, who is an idealist, would like to see is some sort of a settlement, some kind of a calming down in what is going on in Iraq. Because what we don't want, no one wants another regional war, and neither country, UK or US, can afford it.
Well, there's obviously a spillover that has happened by some accounts, Dr. Tarpley, over what has occurred in Syria.
Yeah.
I mean, this situation, these ISIL are, what, 60 miles or kilometers, I forget, away from Baghdad, and you have the threats that they have set against the holy Shia shrines in Iraq, such as Karbala and so forth and so on. Yep. And that puts another dimension of the dangerous predicament that it puts the region in when you're talking about, for example, the Shia shrines. Iran has come out and said, we will defend the Shia shrines. If they were to carry out on that threat, everything would change, wouldn't it? What direction would that go? How will things play out, do you think, Dr. Tarpley?
Yeah.
I'll get an answer from you, Carol.
That, of course, would
Dr.
be
Tarpley first.
extremely dangerous. I'm afraid, though, that I don't share the idea that democracy will guarantee a happy ending. And I think it's wrong to impute a rationality to the process here, Washington, that it does not have. What we have is a war psychosis in the entire elite, neocons and the humanitarian bombers or responsibility to protect crowd, the Samantha Power types. They are horrified. They wanted to bomb Syria. They didn't get to bomb Syria. They never wanted to negotiate with Iran. They wanted to bomb Iran. And the other question, of course, Putin. They're humiliated. They're apoplectic about Ukraine. They're afraid to confront Putin in Ukraine because of Russia's Topol-M intercontinental ballistic missiles. And therefore, we have the line coming from Anne-Marie Slaughter, formerly of the State Department, saying, if you want to confront Putin, you confront him in Syria, where he's much weaker than he would be in Ukraine. And one other, I think, big danger is in the State Department now, there's this idea that Maliki has to go. This takes me back to Vietnam in 1963, when Averell Harriman and a couple of other people in the State Department decided that President Diem was counterproductive, and they arranged to have a coup and his assassination. And of course, the people they brought in were perfectly incompetent and indeed set the stage for this military debacle. So these are people who have learned nothing. And one of the things that Professor Stephen Cohen was saying the other day at a Russian seminar is an anti-war opposition in the United States is non-existent compared to the Cold War. And compared to the time 10 years ago when you had Bush in the White House. So the doors are relatively open to adventures. And it means the neocons surrounding Obama, who is a weak and passive figure, of course, right? A puppet president of Wall Street. But right, surrounding him and pushing him in the direction of something unthinkable.
Well, Kara Gould, we're reaching at the end of the program. You know, when I'm stepping back and I'm listening to Dr. Tarpley, I can't help but think how many countries the U.S. is involved in that is in some form or another involved in violence. Ukraine, we could talk about their pivot to the Southeast Asia. No violence there, but the threats coming from and the friction between the U.S. and China. We look at their involvement, for example, in Syria. And then, of course, now we're looking at Iraq. And going back to 2003 and the invasion, it doesn't seem like the U.S. has been successful. We could also mention Afghanistan. And what they have left behind in this war on terror is fueled extremism and terrorism that at one point or another, by many accounts based on the intelligence community in the U.S., is going to backfire and threaten the United States. What type of legacy is the U.S. leaving behind with their interventions in this case in point with these countries?
Well, look, I wrote an article about 2 years ago about the situation in Libya. And there was some involvement, the UK, the US, the Allies were trying to release Libya from the grips of a dictator, Gaddafi. When that happened, and actually it was the people of Libya in the end who achieved that, people were coming onto British television, onto a program called Newsnight, Libyan spokespeople, complaining bitterly, why did the Allies intervene? Why did the UK and US? You've destroyed my country. There's a limit to how much I can take as a political observer, political commentator, of no matter what the US, let me rephrase it, whatever the US or UK do, or France, the Allies, and NATO, these countries complain. You've destroyed our country. You've done nothing for us. There have been improvements in Afghanistan.
Unfortunately, I got to jump in. We just don't have the time. We're fresh out of time. I apologize. Carol Gould there, author and political commentator, talking to us from London. Thank you very much. And Dr. Webster Griffin Tarpley, author and historian, talked to us from Washington. Thanks for tuning in to another edition of The Debate. It's bye-bye for now.